You're listening to Arsenal Pass, a flesh and blood podcast for players by players. And all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Rathe. Welcome to Arsenal Pass.
Welcome back, everyone, to episode 32 of Arsenal Pass. I'm Brendan Patrick, joined always by calling champion Hayden Dale. Hayden, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, Brendan. How are you?
I'm pretty good. For some reason, I was stumbling over that intro in my brain. I was like, is he a calling champion? Is he not? I don't know. Guess doesn't count because it was in 2019, right? So
Fair
this
enough.
week, we're going to be back with one of our Runeblade class deep dive. We had part one about 2 weeks ago, and it's going to be part two of that. So for these episodes, Hayden and I dedicate an entire, podcast episode or 2 episodes in the case of Runeblade to breaking down a specific class and constructed with a focus on core fundamentals, ways to build and play the hero, key cards, strengths and weaknesses, how to win with it, and ultimately how to beat with it. How to beat it. So this is going to be part 2 of Runeblade. But before heading to that, Hayden, let's talk about your week in Flesh and Blood.
Yeah, let's talk about how to beat with it.
How to beat it.
Yeah, I actually got back from the Calling Orlando. I think we recorded last week's episode in person, which was awesome. It's kind of weird because usually we record every 7 days, but this is like 10 days since we last recorded, just because I've been traveling. So got back, took the week off from Flesh and Blood, from testing, but actually I ended up playing quite a bit of Flesh and Blood because there was 2 skirmishes on in the weekend, which I decided that I was like, no, I'd probably just maybe go to one. There was a draft skirmish, which I was really excited to play, so I knew I really wanted to go to that. I went to the draft skirmish on Saturday. That was awesome. I had a lot of fun. There was 2 drafts, like the Swiss draft, and then there was a top 8 draft as well. Lost in the semis of that one, but I had a pretty cool Lightning Lexi deck in the top 8. And then I kind of got home and was like, no, I really want to play some more Flesh and Blood tomorrow. I want to play skirmish. So grabbed out the Kano deck and went along and played a Blitz skirmish, which I ended up losing in the finals of, but just had a really fun day playing Blitz. I haven't played Blitz in forever, and it's a format that I think is best played in person in an event like a skirmish, where it's, you go for 4 hours or whatever, you get to play 5-6 rounds of Swiss, you play your top 8, and you get on with the rest of your Sunday afternoon or whatever it is. So yeah, I had a lot of fun. And then I think because I hadn't been testing this week and there was opportunities to play draft, I was like really excited about that. So I went and did a draft on Tuesday night, sorry. And then I even played some constructed last night. So yeah, my week away from Flesh and Blood has ended up me going to 4 different local events and playing some Flesh and Blood. So it's it's been good.
Yeah, I am happy that skirmish is in the Flesh and Blood now, but I have to say that there was something very special about those online skirmishes, especially if you sort of grinded them. There's just something really cool about like kind of every single night, like Friday, Saturday, Sunday. This is back when we were pushing for XP. I'd get on at, it'd be 5 p.m. We go to like 2 a.m. or wake up at 5 a.m. to get on for some European one. And like as soon as I got on, I'd get in the Discord and there was Dante, Rob, all these other people. We were all just kind of like on this skirmish circuit. There's definitely something really special about that, especially like 128 players. It was just a cool kind of experience while we had it. So I don't want to say that it was never good when it was online, because there was an aspect that was. Yeah, there was an aspect that I kind of look back fondly on. That for me, these in-person ones, I love playing in person. They don't really capture like the competitive kind of aspect that the online ones are feeling. But that was also, it's like kind of the evolution of Flesh and Blood, right?
Yeah.
Where our idea of competitive, what competitive is, has changed, right? Because we've gone from pre-releases being like these things you were trying to spike, and skirmish was something that everybody was trying to win, and now like everything's a lot more casual. That's been put in perspective when you play these calling events and all this other stuff.
Yeah, Brendan Spike Patrick over here. No, but it is like it's you go through these iterations of events, and now you have for the past 2 months you've traveled almost a majority of the weekends to events where you've seen a Dante Delfica, you've seen a Rob Seigel, you've seen these players battling it out for calling top 8s, for calling day 2s, for national championships, because that's now the pinnacle of the competitive play of Flesh and Blood. Whereas at one point, skirmish was the pinnacle of competitive play, because that's all that we had in the ecosystem, just due to circumstances.
Yeah, so while Hayden has taken the week off of testing, I have not, so just have had my usual testing, but it's been a little bit harder for me. This past week, I've tried to stop drinking caffeine, stop consuming caffeine, and
Oh, good luck with
my
that.
goodness, it has blown. Yeah, those 5 a.m. sessions are not fun. So I've been so tired. It's crazy. But we'll be welcoming Hayden back into the testing group on Monday after his beachfront vacation,
Sabbatical.
his sabbatical. Anyway, Hayden, let's talk about the news.
Yeah, let's do it. I was gonna say I'm a bit of an alien. I find it hard to identify with Brennan because I don't actually drink coffee, so would just look at me with blank stares. Yeah, let's get into the news. We have some like super exciting news. I mean, we have the announcement of the new set. I know we've talked about it for 3 weeks now. We thought initially there was like going to be something at Nationals, and then we thought November 16th was like the date of the announcement, and as it turns out, it's exactly what happened. So Everfest is the next set for Flesh and Blood. This is a supplemental set that's coming out coming out in February. So has a release date. I think the release date's been given of February 4th. Is the first. February 4th is the release date, and preview season starts January 24th. So really like a really tight turnaround between the preview season and release date. But there's no pre-release for this, right? Because it's a supplemental set. It's a set for constructed, so a set purely designed for constructed play. Think Crucible of War, very much the same thing. We get 10 card booster packs. You get 24 packs per your display. In terms of like the card, just talking through like what is happening with Everfest. So it is, of course, a set in Aria. If you followed any of the lore of Tales of Aria and what's happened so far through, this new set that we've just experienced. Everfest is like the carnival, like the festival of the city. So interesting to see. I saw a comment of someone saying, "I want to see a brute rock up to the Everfest. What are they doing there?" So I guess we'll find out.
A brute. Yeah, it's a brute in the in wearing the tunic, right? That was always the meme. So like. Back in like Welcome to Rathe, I can imagine every class was like playing tunic, and still, obviously a lot of classes too. And it's like, what does a Rhino look like in a Fiendal spring tunic?
Yeah, exactly. What does Rhino look like in a spring tunic? So, yeah, February 4th. Very much excited. I think we thought we might get it somewhat sooner, but this is going to be about 5 months between Tales of Aria and the release of Everfest of the supplemental set. So, it does contain cards for every new hero in the game. It contains new cards for every hero in the game. Has cold foils for first edition, of course. And there's 198 cards in the set. So the breakdown is 1 Fable, 3 Legendary, 45 Majestics, 61 Rares, and 88 Commons. So interested, like the 45 Majestics. I think if we look at Crucible, very likely that we'll get another run of like Majestic equipment, like we saw with the last set. I'm sure that we're likely to see that again. And then the Legendaries, in the previous set there was a shape-shifting hero, of course, with Crucible. We had the Tunic reprint. And the third one was... Did we get 3 in Crucible? I'm trying to think.
Not on the tip of my tongue, we didn't. We had
I think it was 2. I think it was just
Fable.
2. Yeah, just 2. And Shard was Fabled. So we do get 3 Legendaries this time, so that's exciting. One last thing with the release of Everfest as well is that LSS have announced that this will have fully recyclable paper packaging for the new set, which personally I think is like a really positive move for the game. I've actually questioned this with other TCGs, and I know that's something that Magic tried with Modern Masters famously once with like cardboard boxes. So it's going to be exciting to see how LSS execute on this and what they do with the paper packaging. I think the idea behind the move is really positive and a good one to be a company that is considering the environmental impacts of the retail landscape and how they interact with their community as well. So yeah, looking forward to that, and we'll see what comes of it once the boxes land in February 4th.
Yeah, I'm just happy that it looks like LSS isn't trying to maximize their bottom line at any cost, right? They're willing to be like a first mover, be the industry standard, and maybe make the switch and come out with a better product that maybe we'll see other TCGs sort of mimic it if it's successful.
Yeah, like it's a risk, right? You take a risk to do something that maybe hasn't been done before, has been trialed but wasn't successful. But to be a small or medium-sized company and kind of just follow is really easy to do. But to be a disruptor, to be like a first mover, as you say, is a more difficult decision. And no doubt that impacts on costs. It always comes down to even a few cents make a big difference at the end. So I'm excited to see the change at least. Moving on, I guess when we're talking about product-related news, Arcane Rising is now officially out of print. So we had the news, of course, of Crucible Unlimited being out of print, and now Arcane Rising Unlimited is officially out of print. It sounds like there's still stock floating around the world. I know a lot of distributors still have some stock, stores have some stock, so I don't think we're going to see Arcane Rising, just vanish immediately overnight. But we do know that stores and distributors aren't going to be receiving more Arcane Rising in the future. So has raised some questions about reprints. Of course, Skullcap, Command and Conquer, two very popular cards, played in a lot of decks in Classic Constructed, Blitz, and I'm sure UPF as well, probably, that people are now looking at and questioning, will we see reprints? I would say that Everfest is probably very... You could probably put some safe money on there being some sort of reprint from these sets that have just gone out of print, I think.
So just want to clarify with you two. Are you aware that Skullcap is confirmed as a reprint?
Oh, yeah, it is too. You're right. Good point.
Yeah.
So it is safe money. I told you it's safe money.
It's very, very safe money, that is.
Yeah, I think initially with the video that James did with Red Zone Rogue, and then the little spoiler article that came out announcing Everfest, there was or before that, there was the Skullcap with the Everfest set code, right?
EVR.
Yeah. So there you go. Safe money. I told you. Don't even worry about it.
Doesn't get much safer than reporting confirmed news.
I'm good at this. So yeah, Arcane Rising out of print, but of course Skullcap. I'm guessing probably be interesting because when we had Crucible reprinted, right, we had Tunic, but we didn't have, like say Enlightened Strike, for instance. So Command and Conquer might be it's not quite as confirmed as Skullcap, right?
Yeah, definitely not quite, but much needed, right? Probably one of the most played generics in the game.
Yeah, either that or maybe the next set we roll into has reprints of some of these staples. I mean, Art of War is another one as well, right? So it'd be interesting to see. Wanted to shout out just all the winners of nationals. So we had 8 national championships take place last weekend, including Canada, Poland, Germany, and some really deserving winners. In those nationals. Brennan, I think the 8 nationals in one weekend is like a lot, and there seemed to be coverage across like Facebook, Discord, like lots of different social media channels of these events in terms of just like updates, which is really cool to see. People in the local communities updating about which decks made top 8, which players made top 8, how their runs were through the weekend. So that was really, really cool to see as well.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of nationals, we did throw up a deck. I wouldn't even call it a deck tech. It's like a deck
overview profile, right?
An overview, yeah. So there was a interesting deck that won 3 nationals last week, and it was a hybrid Briar deck. Basically, it's a Lightning Briar shell with like Channel Mount Heroic and the supporting cards to try to abuse Channel Mount Heroic into 0 cost, which is, if you played Earthbriar, that was like the turns that were the most broken, where you could have multiple attacks on a single combat chain benefiting from that bonus effect. So it's interesting to see if it's actually legit. It apparently is after it won 3 events. So we did a little overview, talk about the deck, and I'm excited to see what the future of the format is with a hybrid deck emerging.
Yeah, pick it up and play it. I think I'm going to definitely sleeve it up and play some games with it. I did see someone reference that it may be the sort of demon child of Tarek Patel and Zach Bunn. That's what I've heard. So.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. Just right now, for anybody who hasn't watched the video yet, there's a couple of matchups they're currently rough, and this is in quotations, rough for Lightning Briar. It's going to be Oldhim, Viscerai, and Ice Lexi. This is much better into all 3 of those. Significantly better, right? Especially into something like Viscerai, if you're coming up the top and getting the bonus at Channel Heroic. So the question is can you win the mirror? So if you can consistently win the mirror, then it's going to be the best deck, in my opinion. So try it out for yourself. Let us know. I want to shout out to all of our patrons for supporting. We have almost, we're around 300 right now, which is just incredible to think. The Arsenal Pass Patreon does have tons of extra content, as well as, extra podcasts, a live session, which I think we're doing this next one on Sunday.
Yeah.
As well as if we put up a deck tech on the YouTube channel, we do throw up the Cyborg Guide, deck theory, and all that good stuff on the Patreon there. We have one going up. I think it's on Friday. It's going to be Lightning Briar, so full Lightning Briar deck tech, as well as the Cyborg Guide, and for the deck theory and all the matchups. We actually did a video for this one, so if you are a patron, let us know what you think of that instead of doing the traditional write up, and then we just have like the sideboard, what comes in specifically as a write up attached to that as well. We tried to keep it video and keep it more personal.
Get your little cheat sheet that you can take along, which is perfect, right? You can print those out if you're going to an event and you've got your sideboard notes already there. But yeah, I mean, that list as well was the list that all 3, myself, you, Brennan, Dante, played at the Calling, and I think 2 cards different to what Tarek won the event with.
Yeah, I did tweak the sideboard a little bit because we had some really bad sideboard plans, especially into like Oldhim and anything that was a bit fatiguing. We were actually playing more cards where I think you want to play 60. Maybe you play like a couple cards more than that, but you want to get to your maybe deck stacking as quick as you can, for sure. Want to shout out that we have a gameplay video that went up. Speaking of Lightning Briar, it's going to be Lightning Briar versus Matt Rogers' Viscerai list that recently went up on the YouTube channel. Really cool. I think that if you're looking at the meta right now, a big question right now is like, how do you beat Lightning Briar? And a pretty clear answer that's actually Matt's list. So check out the video, see how it went. But I can tell you from the Lightning Briar side that Viscerai is one of the last things I want to sit across from, especially this sort of kind of combo-y ODK-esque list, which is, I'm hesitant to use the word ODK because that's not what it is, but it does, combo out and use a lot of rune chants to blow you up. But check it out. It's on YouTube. And let us know what you think. Hayden, what do you have for the Command and Cookout this week?
Yeah, I got a great question for the Command and Cookout. Thank you for asking. We have a few questions on our backlog, which thank you to everyone who's submitted some questions. But I had a question that I think is like super relevant to Nationals, Orlando, current class constructor format that sort of was submitted late. And this comes from Brian Gottlieb. Brian, who we've had on Time in the Round before, is a well-known Magic personality, podcaster. He sent in a question, which I think is just a great question for right now, which is, it was really interesting to hear you guys walking back the idea of increasing deck size in the Oldhim matchup, because to me, coming from Magic, it's always struck me as crazy how often people are willing to play deck sizes over 60 cards for basically the reasons that we talked about. We talked about this last week as well. Does the Oldhim experience have you rethinking larger deck sizes generally now, or do you still think this was a special circumstance where there was an unusually high premium on card quality and pitch stacking? I think this is a great question because I think in the past probably 7 to 10 days, Brendan, right, we've had varying thoughts on this, and we've probably come back to a lot of our base sort of fundamentals and understanding of cards and decks in this format.
Yeah, I mean, so we got to bring it back, right? We got to go back in time. We got to go back to Welcome to Rathe, right? So Welcome to Rathe, there were some fatigue decks, not the drone decks, the pre-drone decks, because that's a different story. But we had like Bravo fatigue, which was just straight attrition, and it would just block you out, and it would use like efficient defense reactions to kind of, really suck all the fun out. So the idea when you would increase, because you would get fatigued down, you're like, what do I do? The reason why you would increase the amount of cards in your deck is like you literally just needed threats to throw into them, because the reason that they could keep blocking you out was because of these things like the defense reactions that got a bunch of value, right? When they're able to like staunch response you really effectively, or use their sink below, their 0 for 4. And like you just needed more cards to get past those really effective and efficient blockers. And then you would, you come into where they just block for 3 and they block for 3. And that was okay. Like if every card in their deck just blocked for 3, they probably wouldn't fatigue you. But because they have all these defense reactions and they have these really efficient blocks, you could add more cards to help you out in the fatigue matchup, add remembrance, stuff like this. So why this doesn't work against Oldhim, there's a pretty clear path to beat Oldhim as Lightning Briar, and you're going to be chipping in damage throughout the game, and you do this little dance where you're just like, you need to put enough pressure on them so they can't hit you back throughout the game while you try to stack your decks. You need to play all 3 of your Sonatas. There might be a world where we cut Sonata in that matchup, but we'll see. Play all 3 of your Sonatas, then you start stacking. So you have to stack Sting, Triple Ball, and it's pretty clear that like the only way you win versus like hard fatigue, or at least the way you should win a vast majority of games, is by that exact sequence of cards and kind of by not much else. So what we found is like, we kind of came in with that legacy boomer theory of like adding more cards to have more threats to kind of get through. It doesn't work for Oldhim. You need to get to the stack as fast as possible, because as soon as like you try to like stumble around, they can just smack you back like really hard.
Yeah,
right?
For sure.
Winter's Wail's bad enough, but they could Glacial Footsteps you, they could Spinal Crush you. So you need to have the consistent pressure every turn, and then you need to like turbo to your Sting, Ball stack.
Yeah, I think we've been pretty vocal in previous formats as well, in the last format about, or even Unlimited, right, about just playing more cards in your deck, and like why we think that is often so inefficient and ineffective, and just the incorrect thing to do. But actually, I just wanted to use your example of like Welcome to Rathe meta. Another reason that was so effective, right? You talked about trading cards, an immovable often traded for 2 cards for just the 1 card immovable, but also the power level in that format was really low, right? So the synergistic nature of a lot of the decks, there was a lower card pool, just the power level was lower. So cards like these defense reactions that traded, 1 card for 2 cards was often just, really, really effective and could block out most of the damage. You don't have that as much anymore. So you take the old time example, right? Like if you just sit back and you play worse quality cards, then you're just giving your opponent more time to chip in damage, to set up what they need to set up, to find an effective game plan. Whereas I guess you just use those really fast, quick punches, and you get to your end game. You're often a lot better served. And there's certainly matchups where you need more density of power cards, but Lightning Briar isn't one of those decks. Like basically the whole deck is, has that ability. There's all, the 0 for 4 concept is that every hand plays efficiently and effectively. If you use something maybe like Rhinar, where Blood Rush Bellows is like maybe your best win condition, then maybe something like a Remembrance in certain matchups helps you in that regard, right? But even then, I still would only play 60 cards. I would use a card like Remembrance to fill my my deck back up in that way. So I think in general, we've probably had some conversations and some thoughts about playing more than 60 cards. Lightning Bryant all time, maybe I'd play 62 because I want to make sure I can get in 8-ball lightnings or whatever. But to be honest, it's so minimal.
Yeah, I don't think I think you just play straight 60. Like it's just such like in that matchup specifically, or just like any fatigue matchup. If you're on the Lightning Briar list, there's just such a clear way to win the game. Like it's just this is how you do it, right? Like yes, you can win by just coming over the top when they like just don't have it, right? They don't have the efficient defense reactions for when you have the big plunder on turn on like an exude or something, and you just get them. And sometimes that'll happen, but if it's like a normal game, yeah, I mean most of the time you have to stack the deck, and it's like the faster you get to that stack, the better. Because every time anytime you're setting up for a game plan, you're also throughout the game in which you're getting to that stack or getting into that end game, you have to manage your life so that when you finally do get to that turn, you can take the hit, right? Like I can take the 4 he throws at me or something like this. My life total is pressured down to like 2 or 1. I mean, he could just swing the hammer for 4. When I've got my stack, it finally comes over. I pitched it perfectly, comes into my hand, and now I just have to block with a key card, and it doesn't work. So,
yeah, it's too late. Yeah, and I completely agree with Brian. Like coming across from Magic initially, like it was crazy to play more than 60 cards, but then I played with the Welcome to Rathe format, and that kind of changed my perspective. And then I think if I look at like the chain deck that we played through the season, like our plan into fatigue matchups was to play like between 64 to 68 cards. And I think a big reason for that was like the what's the word I'm looking for? The time that you get to your end stack, actually having a number between 62 and 66 cards was often like 64 was actually like a perfect number for stacking the deck and coming back to your like Shackle 7 turn, which was really important. Shackle 7 to Shackle 8 turn, which was really important. So there was like a good reason, I think, to play above 60 cards. But there's so few and far between, and I think unless you have, I think we've said this about limited, unless you have like a really, really good reason to be playing more than the minimum cards and diluting your deck, like it has to be a really, really good reason.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Chain is like a whole different beast because of what that deck was doing and like, how your threats were dispersed. It was just, it kind of breaks a lot of the base theory in this game. And playing the more cards. What was that?
It's just like a philosophical conversation because I think like thinking back on it now, if I was to just think about the chain list now, I don't even know if I would play more than 60 cards, which is pretty funny. Like I think as we've gone through and talked about this kind of idea of playing more cards and why you do it now with chain, even I'm like, is it correct?
A lot of it was insurance, I think. You had like a lot of insurance. If you had to block with cards you didn't want to block with, like key pieces to your end game stack. And like it just your deck size just really didn't matter, right? Because you got to the full mill of your deck in the end game stack on the exact same Shackle, unless you played like 60 cards. And sometimes it was less ideal to realize it on Shackle 7 rather than Shackle 8. But this is getting way too nitty gritty into the chain.
I agree.
This is like, have you ever seen that meme where it's like the dude from the History Channel who's talking about aliens with the crazy hair? I feel like that's me every time we talk about chain.
Well, anyway, Brian, thank you for sending the question in. Great question again, and a very topical conversation just about as we start to think about how the game develops, the power level of cards, and the idea of fatigue as a strategy and how people can play into that and counteract that strategy. So if you want to get your question in for the Commander Cookout section, you can do it a few different ways. You can email into us at arsenalpassfab@gmail.com. You can drop a tweet to one of us, or you can just drop a comment below and just let us know that you've got a question for the Commander Cookout. We've even had some patrons send through on Patreon their questions. So whatever way you want to do it's fine by us. Just let us know and we'll try and get your question on the show.
Sweet. All right, Hayden, into the main topic.
Yeah, so last week we obviously took a bit of a break from Runeblade to discuss the Calling Orlando. We recorded in person, but the week prior we had done our part 1 of our Stir the Meadowwoods, our Runeblade 101 deep dive. And we broke this into 2 parts because, Runeblade has 3 different heroes. It's had a massive impact on, especially the classic constructed meta. And it's just, there's a lot happening. So in part 1, we talked about the history of the class. We talked about key cards for each of the sets that Runeblade has been in, for the heroes in those sets, how those decks are built, their strategies overall, and how they kind of play out. So if you haven't gone back and listened to that, then I'd recommend going and doing so. At the end of this, actually, I'm going to stitch these 2 together for a video and a pod so that you can listen to this all in one go if you want to go back and listen to it at some point. But for now, let's get in and talk about how to play Runeblade.
Big question. We got 3 heroes to talk about here. All quite a bit different in design, in my opinion.
Yeah, so it's going to depend on the type of deck you're playing, right? So, one of the most important, I guess, things in terms of like structuring your turns with Runeblade is probably going to be a mix of your non-attack actions and attack actions, and that's been the same for Viscerai, that's been the same for Chain, and that's been the same now for Briar. So all of the heroes, and we talked about this in the deck building, but all of the heroes have some sort of bonus that they get from playing non-attack and attack actions, and a lot of that comes in the form of the weapon. So we talk about Viscerai, obviously inherently that's the ability. If you've played a non-attack action this turn, then when you play a Runeblade action card, you get a rune chant, right? So really incentivizes you to be playing some sort of non-attack action into Runeblade cards. With Chain, of course, like Nebula Blade was the biggest part of that deck in the previous format. Now Rosetta Thorn, really encouraging you to play a non-attack action, probably an attack action, and then your weapon, depending on which weapon you're playing. And then Briar, of course, non-attack actions are going to help you generate embodiments of lightning. And then the attack actions are going to utilize those and then help you create embodiments of earth, as well as then contribute towards that Rosetta Thorn attack. So basically, if you think about how Runeblade is going to play out at its most core function, the step 1, stage 1, phase 1 of playing a Runeblade is play a non-attack action, play an attack action, do something else, right?
Yeah. Definitely. I mean, that's kind of the key cornerstone of the class is the balance of non-attack actions, attack actions. It's actually like I think it's one of the deck building limitations that they put on Runeblade to try to contain its power. And also reward it for building that way. But it should be, I guess, I think in theory, it should be worse for you to be playing like an exact split often. But it's like an interesting design space that we're in Runeblade, but very, very kind of cornerstone to the class. Yeah. So next I'll talk about kind of sequencing in Runeblade to get the best value out of your rune chants and on-hit effects. This is seen a lot. Obviously the Grasp of the Arcanite has this blocking usage, but creating that rune chant can be really important, right? You have your on-hit effects, not on-hit effects, but you have conditional go-again effects and Meet and Greet, Rip Through Reality, stuff like this, as well as on-hit effects, things like Consuming Volition, right? So if you've done the arcane damage, Consuming Volition, if it hits, will require your opponent to discard a card. So it's a really interesting game when you just pitch 2, create a rune chant, come in with Consuming Volition. Your opponent is presented with the question. It's okay, if I don't block this rune chant, then this Consuming Volition will make me discard a card, or I can pitch an entire card just for 1 rune chant and then get rid of this on-hit effect.
Yeah, so one of the most important things I think when you talk about sequencing with Runeblade is trying to give your opponent the least amount of information as well. So if you've ever played a class like Ninja or Warrior, if you famously, you talk about Dorinthia, right? The more cards Dorinthia has in hand, the less known their players, right? Whereas if they pitch a blue, they play a Warrior's Valor, they come in with the Dawnblade and they have 1 card in hand, pretty reasonable that you can assume that card's an attack reaction a lot of the time. And it's kind of similar with Runeblade in some ways where, and I wanted to talk about this before, but if you talk about that kind of non-attack action versus attack action, if we talk about that sequencing again, say we play a Mothrin Skies, right? And then we come in with, maybe we're playing Viscerai and we come with a Drawn to the Dark Dimension. So we're drawing another card. We're triggering some rune chants. We've played our non-attack action, we've played our attack action, we still have 2 cards in hand. Now our opponent has to make a decision, do we prevent these rune chants because they might have a Meet and Greet or they might have Consuming Volition, or do we not care about those and we just focus on the attack action because it has an on-hit effect with the Mothrin Skies trigger happening? So that's one of when you talk about sequencing, those are some of the things where if I'm playing a Runeblade, I'm really thinking about how can I sequence this to get the most value out of my attacks and non-attacks? So, how can I do the most damage over a turn? But also, how can I give my opponent the least amount of information in terms of what I'm going to do next? Because it's going to make it difficult for them to deal with that split damage efficiently, especially if they're trying to factor in on-hit effects or bonus effects like a Consuming Volition, like a Meet and Greet, like a Rip Through Reality, etc. Dread Triptych even.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's present in a lot of classes, but Runeblade is definitely one of the key ones, right? Because you would, if your turn was conditional on your Meet and Greet having go again, if you had an attack that was going to be on the combat chain before then, it would be better to make the rune chant on that attack and not break the chain, obviously, later as well. But then you could get this kind of unsuspecting go again on your Meet and Greet, where your opponent, if you had presented the rune chant with the Meet and Greet, probably would have blocked it to stop your turn in its tracks.
Yeah, the classes that have the most impact in terms of sequencing are the classes that have go again, right? The classes that go wide. So Ninja, Runeblade, even Warrior to an extent with Bolton, and even Dorinthia, of course, with just because of how you sequence the cards in hand. But then you look at something like a Guardian, right? Sequencing is less important because you probably I don't know, making a seismic surge off your tectonic plating and then coming in with a spinal crush or something, right? Like there's less sequencing decisions to be made. Your decisions are more about efficiency of defense and offense and how you probably pitch your deck. Like that's more important. So it's just when you consider Runeblade, like one of the most important things is sequencing, as it may not be for other classes. So yeah, every class has its nuance.
All right, on to the arsenal. An important spot for many classes, but particularly important for Runeblade, a class that I think traditionally likes to utilize things like Plunder Run, as well as when you're playing Lightning Briar, sometimes you will opt to arsenal the attack actions, even in Earthbriar, right? Because you want to minimize that chance of you drawing the full non-attack action hand. Obviously, things like Plunder Run will take precedence over this for your arsenal slot, but it is really important to kind of keep that slot in mind. I think for Runeblade in particular, it's kind of a critical part of play.
Yeah, I mean, we go back to the thing I just said before around sequencing and known versus unknown information. A 5-card hand is more difficult to play into a 4-card hand, but with Runeblade, and especially like a Viscerai or a Briar in particular, there's extra effects that come in there. So if you think about with Viscerai, so if you play a 5-card hand, maybe it's a non-attack action from Arsenal, and then you still have 4 cards in hand, you've already turned on the Viscerai ability with your bonus card effectively with your 5th card, and then everything after that is like an additional effect that you're getting. Whereas if you have 4-card hand, the first card you play is turning on that effect, and you're gonna get 1 less rune chant minimum. So there's that piece of it. There's also the piece of I guess like the combo-esque or the like synergistic aspect where you have a card maybe like Mordred Tide or Plunder Run, these kind of effects that you want to maximize the amount of cards you play on that turn to get the effect out of it. So with Plunder Run, where you want to have as many attacks as possible to make sure you hit that Plunder Run effect. With the Mordred Tide, you want to play as many things that create rune chants as possible. So you want more cards to be able to do that. And I guess with the Chain is like a little bit of an exception because you have cards that you can play from Banish, so that's like somewhat can equate to your Arsenal in some ways, but it can be similar, right? Like it could be a Shadow Puppetry from Arsenal or Morphin Skies or something, which enables you to play these extra cards that you have available. And probably the last thing I want to say on the Arsenal slot is that often the Arsenal slot is really important to use as a Runeblade player to guarantee your mix that you need. And when I say that, I mean, we talked about you need non-attack actions and you need attack actions. One of the best ways to use your arsenal is to guarantee that you have one of those pieces, right? So maybe you, famously, like we talked about this right a lot in Chain, is that we would often put the non-attack action into our arsenal, right, to guarantee that we had that, so we could play Bounding Demigons or Unhallowed Rites from Banish, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you see that kind of arsenal insurance in the opposite of it, like I said, in Earthbriar, right, where you will actually arsenal the attack action to,
Exactly.
Not draw the blank. But in Chain, it was kind of the opposite, right? You needed the non-attack action to ensure that you could actually play out those Bounding Demigons and Unhallowed Rites that would end up in your Banish.
Yeah, same with Briar, right? Like that's, people talk about Plunder and how strong that card is, and yeah, but the thing we talk about less is the fact that that's half an embodiment of lightning coming out of your arsenal. It's a guaranteeing that you have that non-attack action that you need for Rosetta Thorn, etc. So that insurance policy of the arsenal that you just called it, I like that insurance policy, is actually just really critical for a class like Runeblade that has restrictions on the sequencing and the card types that you need on any given turn. Next thing I want to talk about is, I guess, just play patterns as well. And one of the really important play patterns I think you see, especially with a card like Rosetta Thorn, but you saw this a little bit with Nebula Blade as well, is defending with 2 cards and then coming back with either a 2 or 3 card hand. You see this a bit with Lightning Briar, for instance, because of the embodiments. Sometimes maybe you have your opponent has a pivot turn, you throw down 2 non-attack actions to defend out because you maybe have 2 embodiments, so you're able to defend for 2 cards for 8. Super efficient, right? And then you get to come back with like a non-attack action, an attack action, and then Tunic into Rosetta Thorn, something like that. So there's these play patterns, and it's very similar with Viscerai. You could play defend with 2 cards, play Morven Skies from Arsenal, play your Spellblade Strike from hand, and then play Rosetta Thorn or something. So there's these really efficient, I guess, abilities to trade and defend with 2 cards and then come back and still present damage and even set up for a following turn. Even if it's a 2-card hand in Viscerai, say it's a blue and a Spellblade Assault. I'm banking 2 rune chants for my next turn to get set up. So I think it's a really common play pattern that you can see with Runeblades, is and Chain did it as well, is like defend with 2 cards, have 2 to 3 cards to play with on your turn.
Yeah, I mean, so I was gonna say before you said that, it's like Chain is my favorite example, right? You could keep the single card in hand You would banish the Seeds of Agony plus the Ghostly Visit, and you would Seeds of Agony, Ghostly Visit, pitch the blue, obviously with the chain, go again, swing the blade. That's we got 5 plus, so it's a 9 damage swing, and not counting the rune chain that you might be creating off of a single card, which is absolutely bonkers.
Yeah, exactly.
Probably why that got banned, actually.
Maybe.
Maybe.
So the next thing as well, we'll talk about play patterns. We've talked a lot about, I guess, more tempo-based decks or more aggressive-based decks or more turn-to-turn decks where, you're playing out 4 to 5 card hands every turn and you're just trying to trade damage, push damage on one side, maybe defend a bit of damage. And all the decks do that, right? Viscerai is capable of doing that. We just talked about those 2 to 3 card offensive hands versus 2 card block hands. Chain obviously does that really well. Brennan just showed a really good example of how that works. Lightning Briar can do that, or Lightning Briar could just be foot on the pedal on the gas. Lightning Briar traditionally just 5 card hands, but there's also different ways to play Runeblade, right? And one of those,
absolutely,
like more setup turns, right? So one of the I guess the famous ones is like the OTK Viscerai, right? The 1-turn kill Viscerai, stacking up these rune chants. So instead of playing a game where you're trading damage and trading cards throughout the game, you're just trying to prevent as much damage as possible and trying to make as many rune chants as possible as quickly as possible and end the game with one big turn. Thanks to cards like Bloodsheath, the Escalator, Sonata Arcanics now, which is just a very powerful card. You've got Ninth Blades, etc. So that's another way to play Runeblade, which is, I would say, has ebb and flowed throughout formats, right? So we talk about Blitz. OTK was like the way to play Runeblade for a long time. Then Chain came along and Briar came along, but we've seen a resurgence of Viscerai, sort of these semi-OTK decks with like what Matt played at the Calling.
Yeah, so there's actually one thing I want to talk to you about, Hayden. So in the Calling Orlando, I heard some promotes of Control Chain, where they would sit on 1 to 2 shackles, and they would shackles, not shackles,
Shackles.
and they would just sit on the two shackles and just banish 2 cards, kind of get the value right, and then block out with a bunch, and just kind of like try to play this war of attrition while still getting value off the top of their deck. So playing like sort of the 1 card hand to pitch. So people are really excited about it. I don't know if I'm sold, but you talk about different ways to play Runeblade. There's one for you right there.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I'd have to try it out. I'd have some concerns about the variance coming off the top of your deck and losing all your gas cards, the same as any sort of chain. But yeah, I mean, there's so many different ways to play it, right? Like I've definitely played that way in Limited before, where I've had a really high blood deck count, and the only way I felt like I was going to lose my game of draft was just simply run out of cards and cards to pitch, etc. So I can totally see that.
100%.
I think that's kind of all to talk about from like the play pattern side of it. I think if we were to kind of just like tie it into a nice bow, like all of these Runeblades play really well, sort of like tempo games, right? 2 to 3 card hands, and then also 4 to 5 card hands. But then you've got something like a Viscerai that can play OTK. You've got Chain that could set up these in-game states, which involved often 10, 12, 15 cards in one turn. So the Runeblade class is very diverse, and you can see that with the play patterns that it has. And I think there's more to explore. There's things that we haven't seen be explored. We've seen, if we take Briar for an example, so far at the time of this recording, Lightning Briar is the proponent of the format, right? But we have seen some Earth Briar, and we've also seen this new hybrid deck that's kind of come out as well. So I'm sure that we're going to continue to see. And we haven't even seen someone break Blossoming Spellblade yet.
That was literally on the tip of my tongue. I was actually going to say the exact
Stole
thing.
it.
We haven't even seen someone try to break Blossoming Spellblade. Obviously, a freaking busted card if you can double fuse it. And yeah, I mean, that sounds like a Jason Chung deck if I've ever heard of a Jason Chung deck.
Exactly. All right, Brendan, let's move on to, I guess, more of these, how the deck plays out, right? So we talked a little bit about sort of like the key ethos of how to play Runeblade. Is there anything that we need to talk about in terms of, I guess, how the deck plays out? I'm sure there's some things we haven't touched on with like fatigue and like efficiency of weapons, things like that.
Yeah, there's definitely 2 Runeblades that it depends on the archetype you're playing are subject to fatigue, so something to keep in mind. I haven't seen anybody try to fatigue a Viscerai yet, but yeah, both Lightning Briar and of course Chain were is popular for people to play fatigue into those strategies. I think both decks are very well equipped to deal with fatigue. Chain being extremely well equipped, but it's something to keep in mind if you're playing Runeblade. Your opponents may try to just attrition you out of cards.
Yeah, and to be honest, actually, I have seen it with Viscerai back in the Crucible of War format. So we were pretty big on like playing Viscerai for the New Zealand Nationals for like the guys I was working with at the time. And one of the ways that like we're worried about losing was like dash decks, just pumping the decks, they're playing all their blues, taking out all their aggressive cards, and just like blocking every single piece of rune chant damage we could ever do, and then eventually we just run out of like red line cards, right? Because you need some rune chants to hit, and if they never allow you to do that, you can actually get fatigued. So, just pretty funny. But yeah, I mean, if you look at, I guess, the way that the 3 heroes play out, like all of them could be attacked in different ways, and that's something you have to consider when you think about how a deck or a matchup plays out with a Runeblade. Is like, what is your strategy, and then what is your opponent likely trying to do to combat you? Because Runeblade is now, probably, it is the most successful class in Flesh and Blood history, right? So at the time of recording, like players are thinking about how do I beat a Runeblade, and it's whether it's Briar, whether it's Chain, whether it's even Viscerai, like players are going to come with a strategy. So one of them very likely could be Fatigue. So whatever your strategy is, I think you've just got to have an idea of how you're going to play into what people are trying to combat you with.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. I think another thing we didn't really touch on, but I think is really important, is like you have some of the most efficient weapons in the game and the widest choice of weapons. And we did talk about this in part 1, but of course between like Rosetta Thorn, Nebula Blade, Dread Scythe, even I guess maybe not so much Galaxy Black, but there's these weapons.
You're gonna give Dread Scythe the honorable mention, and not. I think Galaxy Black is more playable than Dread Scythe right now.
Now, yeah, but I think Dread Scythe has a really inherently strong ability,
it's gonna be
right?
Sick. Yeah, it's gonna be great. Eventually, it's gonna be awesome.
Yeah, so I'm sure we'll see it. So yeah, and then the other thing as well is like you have great utility of equipment as well. So you have like famously the mini fridge, right? Although actually it's just a fridge at this point, to be honest.
Yeah, it's a full-on Yeti fridge at this point.
Yeah, and by that obviously we mean, you've got Skullcap, access to that, 3 defense over the turns on it. You've got the Grasp, 3 defense over multiple turns. You've got the Skeletor, which can defend for 3 if you need to, 1 and 2, and then 1, of course. And then now you have the Spellbound Creepers, which has this insane ability, and then also has Blade Break for 1. So you defensive wise, you can kind of you can cope.
Yeah, the weapons are really something to kind of like think about and analyze, because they've just had, if we look at both Chain really used Nebula Blade to its max effect, but like now looking at Rosetta Thorn, and then we talk about a card that, none of us were really able to play with, but Duskblade, these Runeblades are packing some punches with their weapons, and it's just crazy to me, because like, I think Rosetta Thorn just might be one of the most powerful weapons in the game. And that's coming off of, immediately seeing Nebula Blade being abused in Monarch, and then Duskblade being banned. So it's an interesting context where these Runeblade weapon designs have landed.
Yeah, Rosetta Thorn is very powerful. If you look at, I just wanted to put in a little mention for Blitz here, and just a bit of, I guess, a little bit of a tip for Blitz. If you're playing Runeblades in Blitz, I think Rosetta Thorn is probably your standard weapon now, unless you've maybe got a Dread Scythe deck or something, or a Nebula Blade deck. And then I think the other sort of option that you have is to play the Dawnblade into control matchups is probably the tip I would give right now, is that if you have a deck that's really based around that non-attack action, attack action weapon build, which is very, very easy to do with most of the Runeblades, you probably want to be playing Rosetta Thorn into like the aggressive matchups, and then just playing Dawnblade into any deck that might fatigue you. Like Dawnblade is the ultimate way to make sure that you can't get fatigued, I think.
Dawnblade?
Sorry. Duskblade.
Duskblade. I was like,
the one that you can play.
Yeah, for sure. Just want to keep us grounded here.
Exactly. Should we move on to, I guess, how to win with Runeblade?
How to win with Runeblade. This is my favorite, especially when we talk about Chain.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll kick off, and I'll let you do the Chain piece, because I know how passionate you are about winning with Chain. But the first thing I want to talk about when it comes to how to win with Runeblade, whether that be Viscerai, whether that be Briar, whether that be Chain, is know your damage plan in any matchup, and how you're going to manage your non-attack actions and attack actions. And what I mean by this is what I talked about before. You've got obviously your damage coming from Arcane, whether that be Rune Chants, whether that be just your Arcane damage from Rosetta Thorn or Vexy Malices, etc. And then you've got your physical damage. And it's really important in any given matchup to know probably what's going to do the bulk of your work. So if you're playing, this is especially true with Viscerai, but if you're playing a deck that has, maybe your 70% of your damage in any given game is going to be physical and 30% is going to be, the arcane damage, you need to consider like how your opponent's going to try and tackle that. Are they going to, before I talk about the Viscerai deck where people just block out the rune chants and then just, maybe take some of the physical, run you out of cards, etc. On the Briar side, right, your physical damage is more important. So you've got to like prioritize those things. Often in some matchups, it's correct to just basically never use your Rosetta Thorn, because the physical damage and the on-hit effects that those present is way more important. But then like into a fatigue matchup or a control matchup that maybe is going to try and run you out of cards, or you need to have more efficient attacks with, efficient damage across the length of the game, then like Rosetta Thorn becomes really important, right? Because of that split damage effect. So just understanding like which damage your opponents actually care about and how they care about it is going to probably dictate how you should play out any given game with your Runeblade deck, and probably how you want to like set up for it as well with your sideboarding.
Mm-hmm. So my favorite part about Runeblade is I think that Runeblade, and arguably every single class of Flesh and Blood needs this, but Runeblade really needs a game plan to win the game. Lightning Briar, maybe a little less so, you can kind of play into some wins with that deck, but we talked about the end game sequence to be fatigued. You need to be very cognizant and very prepared and ready to set that up and execute it, or you're just going to lose a lot of the time. This happens with a lot of the Runeblades. So on Viscerai, traditionally, back in Crucible, the issue would be you would come in with a big attack with 9 rune chance and the 9th Blade of Blood Oath, like this big pivot turn. Your opponent would block it out to their max effect, and then you would have to spend another 3, 4, 5 turns building it up again. And it was this weird scenario where Runeblade just kind of had a hard time closing when it was just Viscerai. And then we talk about Chain. Chain is the pinnacle of crafting an end game to win the game. Most of your opponents would, if you're playing in Monarch, would have a precise game plan for you, some of them being fatigued, some of them not, but you really had to both manage your blood debt, manage your threats, and manage your blocks if it was sort of a mid-range or aggro, right? We talked about that one card sequence where you banish the seeds and the attack action and swing the Nebula Blade forward. That was a great trade into any sort of aggro matchup, playing around your Artivores. But then when you got to fatigue, you had to stack your deck from turn 0 of the game. You're literally setting up the sequence to where you would draw the 4 blues and then banish, the 8 seeds and attack actions and all this stuff to finally kind of close out the game, right? So I think Runeblade, I don't know if it's arguably more than other classes, but just it's definitely heightened that you need to have a very specific game plan to win.
I don't think it is. I think just because of how popular the deck has been and probably the discourse around, and also I think we've got to consider as well, Brendan, our lens on this. We spend a lot of time with the Chain deck, for instance. But if I counter that, I spend a lot of time with Rhinar as well, and I think in a lot of matchups, Rhinar needs a really, really focused game plan on how it's going to play early, mid, and especially the end game, whether it be with Barraging Beatdowns or Blood Rush Bellows or whatever those kind of in-game sequences might be. It's just that I think the Runeblade ones, because of the interchange or how cards interchange, you can set up these in games and have a pretty good theory, and some cards just swap in for each other, so it's a lot easier to execute on these game plans, or maybe easy is not the right word, but you can more consistently do it if you know the cards that you need. So I think that's kind of where the Runeblade piece comes in, and because of the fatigue aspect that's been used to battle Runeblade since Chain, and even a little bit of Viscerai, those end games in particular have been really important. But I can tell your passion is true for the end game.
Absolutely.
One of the other things in terms of winning with Runeblade, you've got to embrace the power and the aggressive nature of the split damage and the go agains, right? That is what Runeblade gives you. I think the OTK side is does that a little bit differently, but it still embraces the power of rune chance of arcane damage, right? Which is something that outside of Wizard, Runeblade's the only other class that can do that, right? So I think it's really you don't want to fight against that, as whether that's deck building, whether that's your game plans that you play out. You want to make sure that you're embracing the split damage, because the split damage is so difficult to deal with. Do you think about how annoying Rosetta Thorn is and how difficult that card is to deal with? It's it's 1 resource for 2 physical and 2 arcane, really tough to stop for 1 resource, or even an attack like a Vixie Malice, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah, those are something that I think you need to consider as well. And then just another way to, I think, if you want to get really efficient and make sure you're winning a lot with Runeblade classes or Runeblade class with heroes, is to understand how tempo works. So how to get a hold of it, how to hold it, and how to turn it around. And Runeblade might be one of the most important for this because of the effects you have. So whether it be the on-hit effects you have with your attacks, whether that be Chain with your banish cards, whether that be Briar with the embodiments, or whether that be Viscerai with rune chants, and how you leverage and utilize those. I think Runeblade is one of the hardest ones to understand how to use and swing tempo, because it often isn't just what your current hand is. It's what your next hand could be if you think about the use of rune chants. It's what your in-game will be. It's all these different things. So yeah, the idea of tempo with Runeblade is kind of difficult to grasp and understand, I think, but really important too if you want to find a lot of success.
Yeah, I think that in Runeblade, particularly in like things like Briar, it's really important to play around those 5 card hands and play around those plunder runs. I think if you look at every kind of turn sequence as like I'm gonna jam as much damage as possible, you find it to be ultimately unsuccessful. Whereas like if you sort of chain plunder run into plunder run and like all this kind of stuff, and obviously maximize your embodiment tokens every turn, value block your opponent. That is maintaining the tempo, right? As they would say.
Yeah, I have a good example from the Calling Orlando. Actually, I played 4 Briar Mirrors over the weekend, and one thing I noticed is that my opponents were a lot of the time like playing their 4 or 5 card hands, like playing their plunder runs from hand to try and like force the effect, and it gave me the opportunity to, just defend like quite efficiently, and then set my own plunder up and into arsenal, and then just come in with an attack action, for instance. And yeah, if you looked at the turn in isolation, it looks really underwhelming. But in actual fact, like I got a massive tempo swing out of it the following turn because of, they traded me a plunder run out of their hand, and I got to put a plunder run in my arsenal. So just like I think you start to identify these patterns a lot of the time, and I had like an opponent in the last round who like I think identified that halfway through the game and kind of changed the way they were playing the game, and it became a very close game in the end.
Yeah, definitely. All right. So let's talk about the strengths of Runeblade, and there are many, as we know from the meta dominance that it's had this past year, we'd say. So I think the flexibility is just super key, right? We see this in kind of even in the ways to build the deck, right? With Viscera, you can take it in OTK route, or you can take it in a Tempo route. In Briar, you can be Earth Briar, you can be Lightning Briar. Both are kind of, I would say both are quite different. And with Chain, I guess it was just sort of one-dimensional, but there definitely were Chain decks that specialized in beating fatigue and ones that specialized in kind of having an edge in the mirror or aggro matchups. So all the heroes are very flexible, and you can kind of suit the game plan that you want to play. I think especially with something like Briar, right? With Briar, there's so much more. There's so much to explore, right? You can be the 0 cost for 4, never pitch for anything, or you can be almost the opposite and be on the Earth side and be playing these 3 cost channel mount heroics, blasting out these command and conquers for 9, and just doing crazy stuff like that.
Yep. I want to rattle off some of the other ones as well, Brendan, as we move through. Hero text boxes. I mean, we've talked about before. Chain, very powerful hero text box. Viscera as well. Like the hero abilities themselves are what inherently, I think, make this class very powerful. And I know that's been the source of some contention and design philosophy. But at the end of the day, if you just take a step back and say, like, what is the some of the key strengths of this class? It's the text box. It's the hero abilities. Sorry.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Chain's text box, I think, is the probably the most interesting one. That was like literally go again on demand. The idea was that you would get punished for having to build your deck, but it turns out that was also a positive, which was funny.
Yeah,
what was funny. Briar's is interesting in the sense that it also targets generics, right? So you don't have to be in the elements to get your embodiment of lightnings. You can play 2 generic non-attacks, and your generic attack actions as well will trigger your embodiment of Earth. So I think that all of the heroes have all the Runeblade heroes have extremely powerful text boxes for what their heroes do.
Yeah. Equipment, you have like a really wide variety of equipment to choose from. I mean, Brendan already talked about his little Smeg fridge that he's got going on there. Not so small, actually. A lot of defensive capability, but also utility. So Bloodsheath, Skeleta, obviously very powerful card, has a lot of things that you can do with that, whether it be like the OTK strategy, whether it just be like efficiency to have like a really big turn off like 3 or 4 rune chants, and effectively save you 2 pitch worth of cards. You have the Arknight, Grasp the Arknight, just a great sort of defensive item that also produces these rune chants, and then now you have the Spellbound Creepers, which is just, I can't highlight how powerful I think this piece of equipment is, and how underexplored I think it is so far. We've seen it in Viscera a little bit. We have not really seen it in Briar. We've seen it maybe a little bit in Chain, but the card is very powerful and has a very strong effect. Again, we talk about go agains, right? And then we haven't even talked about cards like Ebb and Fold for Chain or
Aether Ironweave. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Aether Ironweave. Thank you. I forgot the name. These cards are also very, very effective. So you have a lot of options when it comes to equipment.
Spellbound Creeper is allowing Runeblade to play at instant speed. I saw multiple times the Viscera list kill an opponent on their turn with a Sonata Arcanix.
Yep, exactly.
Concept. Yeah.
As well as equipment, weapon choices, right? We already talked about this. No need to rehash it, but just the amount of weapons you have to choose from and the way that they can influence how you play the game and how you build your decks. There's just so many options. You can even swap those in, right? You could play multiple weapons. Maybe you're playing Reaping Blade in your OTK deck to stop life gain, and then maybe your OTK deck swaps into like more of a mid-range plan, and you're playing Rosetta Thorn. So the weapon choices are very strong as well. Split damage, we talked about this through the whole thing. It's one of the most important things about what Runeblade as a class can do is that split damage. It's hard to deal with, and it's a very efficient way to attack, to be proactive. And then in-game possibilities. Brendan, you talked a lot about this with Chain. There's obviously,
I think every Runeblade hero has like an end game combo to kind of just like finish off their opponent, right?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously Briar has the sting, ball. Chain has, it would be beyond the scope of one sentence to describe that combo. But then also Viscera has stacking up enough room chance to where like your opponent literally with their 4-card hand cannot block it out.
Yeah. Weaknesses.
Sweet.
Talk about weaknesses. Yeah. Fatigue is, I guess, a perceived weakness of the Runeblade class, and it really depends and varies on the builds, the game plans, and just the state of the current meta. If you think about Chain post ban, a lot more susceptible to fatigue, right? But prior to the Seeds ban, it really depended on the builds and the game plans that people had. But fatigue is not going to go anywhere in terms of you have a class that has uses cards to not create physical damage and creates a way that can be defended without expending a card. And by that I mean, come with 3 rune chance, opponent pitches a blue to prevent those, and you had to use a card to create those. So there's always going to be this aspect of fatigue as a possibility. The split damage can sometimes be a liability. Sometimes, it's going to take away from like breakpoints. Your opponent, maybe you're playing as a Guardian opponent who just loves to, use their
staunch response to you.
Exactly, use their resources efficiently, right? 1 resource to prevent a rune chant, then 2 to pay a staunch response is like super efficient. So sometimes that split damage can be a liability.
Mm-hmm. And then next is obviously, we talked about it a little bit, but the balance of attack actions and attack actions. This is definitely a constriction that's been put on the Runeblade class to kind of, I think, keep the power level in check. I mean, it's the trade-off, right? For having the attack actions and the non-attack actions at a close balance, you're able to play cards like Sonata Arcanics effectively, able to swing your blades effectively. But ultimately, that probably does take away from the power a little bit, as if those cards were not conditional, right? But that's probably a crazy world.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that some of those are. I actually want to leave this one to you, Brendan, because I think this is something that you talk about a lot in terms of sequencing, and we've already spoken about it, but just kind of wrapping it up.
Oh, so poor sequencing and pitching can just can lose you a game. Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly important. I mean, we even look at like one of the most linear, proactive strategies in the game, which is Lightning Briar. But in order to win a game against fatigue, sometimes you have to play an extremely challenging endgame. And the only reason why it's so hard, I mean, it's not really hard to stack, Arsenal of Sting and the stack Sting and triple ball, but it's hard to draw that exact hand, right? You're talking about drawing those 4 cards at the exact same time. That's pretty tough. So it's interesting to play the Lightning Briar deck, but then have to, you're playing a deck that doesn't want to pitch. Everything costs 0, and you have to like mindfully pitch away some of these power cards like Ball Lightnings to swing your blade when you don't want to, or create a rune chant. It's a funny little dance you have to do, but it's really, really important to actually winning the game. It's important to keep that in mind too, is like, how am I going to win this game? And obviously in Chain, it was incredibly important, right? Like you were pitching blues, for a while, like you would pitch blues so that you would literally time the sequence perfectly so that when you did get to your final banish, that you would actually draw all 4 blues, the ones you had pitched, and then the cards you would banish would be blood debt reds and yellows and things that would contribute to the combo actually going off. Mm-hmm. So I mean, I think it all really just comes back to knowing how you're going to win the game, having a game plan, but it's important to be very, keep that mindful pitching, is like what we like to say.
And sequencing is so key with Runeblade. Yeah. And I wanted to say that, because I think this is like, we've talked about this a lot, these in-game strategies. Other heroes have in-game strategies, and they have really, I guess, clear things you can do. I think some of them are really underexplored. I want to use Guardian as an example. I think that is somewhat more explored because of someone like Cal McCreath, who's really vocal about that and has spoken about that and written about that, and that kind of information is out there. Some of the other classes, I think those in-games are less obvious, less discussed, less known. I look at a class like Azalea, for instance. I famously played that class for a month or 2 and a bit months straight, and I had this really clear like in-game strategy that I was setting up against so many decks, which involved like pitching take aims to the bottom and setting up like an endless arrow rapid fire like to end the game. And there's these sort of in-games that you can come up with, anyone can come up with, but they are really important for almost every class. It's just that I think with Runeblade, these are a bit more explored, and I think as well, me and Brendan, like we've talked about them a bit more because they're some of the heroes that we've played more recently, I think.
Yeah, and the meta has forced us to develop them, right? Because the meta has adapted to these classes by trying to fatigue them. So that forces innovation on the Runeblade side to deal with that. Like fatigue is, I guess, from like a theory and design standpoint, like a decent strategy into Runeblade.
Yeah.
So from there, you
That's
have
why.
to kind of innovate on the end game to be able to beat that, right? Because like the whole idea with Chain, if we want to bring it back to that, was that like he was making this blood debt. And for having this power that you would trade off in the early and late game, you could fatigue and you could run out of cards. That design maybe didn't get executed totally, but it's the idea.
Yeah. It's just balancing the negatives with the way you build. So I think you hit the nail on the head. Let's move through into matchups, and because we have 3 different heroes through constructed, class constructed, and blitz, and we do always focus on class constructed with these matchup sort of run throughs. We are going to keep this really high level. We're going to talk about just the class as a whole, and maybe we might talk specifically about some of the heroes and some of these matchups and some of the traditional aspects. But because we want to make sure that a lot of these 101s that we do, these deep dives, they're readily available to listen in the future for someone coming in and wanting to learn more about, say, Runeblade, with maybe the fourth hero that gets released, Runeblade hero. We want to make these accessible. So let's just get into
one that gets released in Everfest.
Exactly, yeah.
Runeblade every set.
Let's talk about Brute to start with. I think in general, Runeblade has traditionally a reasonable time against Brutes just because of the split damage, especially into something like a Rhina, and because you can be really proactive, right? So traditionally, like being really proactive into a Brute is really good because they want to like kind of disrupt your hand and do things like that. If you're playing a bit more of a Runeblade deck that's revolving around that kind of play pattern I spoke about earlier of like defend with 2 cards, come in with a 2 to 3 card hand, then yeah, you're going to get punished. And that's more of like a Viscerai plan, I would say, traditionally. Then you can really get punished because of the way that Brute interacts with Intimidate. And then on the flip side of that with, of course, like Livia, that's just pure damage, right, for a lot of the time. And that can also be a little bit dicey.
Yeah, I think it depends what kind of Runeblade you're on there. There is, I know we're keeping this high level, but I'm going to break the rule real quick because it's hot news. So there is actually, a lot of people thought that like Lightning Briar had a really good match into Rhinar, which is true, but it depends if there's actually a strategy Rhinar can employ that's very effective versus Lightning Briar in specific. And so if they play club, what they do is they do like barraging beatdown and then they swing the club, requiring you to block with 2 cards. That deck hates playing 2 card hands, 3 card hands, blocking with 2 cards. Doesn't really matter the embodiment. It's just a great way to like tempo the opponent and kind of like, keep applying pressure, keep requiring them to block or take a ton of damage, right? At like a way overrate amount of damage. And then, using that life total that you're ahead, put the Blood Rush Bellow in Arsenal. And it doesn't matter how many embodiments of Earth they generate, is like you're going to set up a turn where you actually they have no cards in hand, so they can't even effectively use those embodiments. It's a really interesting strategy that I was surprised we didn't see more of at the calling.
Yeah, it's the one of the decks that I was pretty high on for that reason. And a little bit of a plug, just quickly, is that once this drops, the next week or two, we are going to have a deck tech on Rhina, and I'm going to talk about that strategy in that deck tech.
Oh, sweet!
A little bit of a plug there.
All right, let's go to Warrior. I'll start it off. So Warrior's a bit rough, right? Just because a lot of our cards will often block for 2, which is not great. It's tough. It's funny. I think that Warriors, despite like let's talk about Lightning Briar. I feel like you want to go first in every single matchup. Warrior is the one where you don't, right? It's hard when you kind of get on the back foot against a Warrior. No matter what Runeblade you're playing. I know Chain was a different story because you had the Husk, and the Husk is effectively a time walk for a Dorinthia player. But I find that, Dorinthia can sometimes be a pretty hard matchup for Runeblade.
Yeah. I think it's funny, though, on the flip side of that, Boltyn, because of the amount of like non-attack actions and stuff you have.
Definitely counter Boltyn.
Yeah, it's like you traditionally have a pretty reasonable matchup into Boltyn. So it can really depend on which warrior is facing you down. But, trying to, I guess, like race Dorinthia is not really ever an option. So, of course, with Chain, you had Husk, like you said, but maybe for like a Briar or a Viscerai, like that can be a bit more difficult. So, Ninja.
Yeah.
We'll talk about Ninja.
It is. Ninja's an interesting one because, Ninja, you can't mention the Ninja class, like the marquee kind of banner on this class is on hit triggers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And does Runeblade effectively block on hit triggers when it needs to? I think the answer is actually kind of like usually no. It's pretty hard because a lot of your cards block for 2. But if you're playing Briar and generating a ton of, like if it's aggro Ninja, generating a ton of embodiments of Earth, sometimes that can just be, the perfect recipe against an aggro ninja player, right? Because you're non-attack blocks for 2, now blocks for 5 or 6 against their Whelming Gust Wave. That's exactly what you want to be.
Yeah, I think it's you like to talk about like peak theory, right? And in theory, Katsu especially has this idea that so many on-hit effects and can generate really aggressive turns that it should be really strong into Runeblade because you've got so many cards that defend for 2. You've got hands where you really need to keep like 3 or 4 cards, and Katsu can kind of tear that apart, right? And because you don't have on-hit effects, as many on-hit effects coming back the other way, it's the Katsu kind of really enjoys that. I think one of the issues right now with where Ninja is at is that Ninja actually, to me personally, and this could just be a design piece where people aren't finding the right decks, I'm not finding the right decks. Ninja feels a little bit underpowered in Classic Constructed to me. But in theory, the idea behind how Ninja works and some of the cards that are available to you should mean that I think traditionally you have a pretty good play into Runeblade. But we'll see how that evolves as we get like maybe the next Ninja hero, for instance.
Mm-hmm. And on to my class, my favorite class in the class is going to get a ton of support in Everfest, just become tier 1 wizard. So yeah, I think it's generally a race, depending on what class you're on, right? So with Chain, it was definitely a race. With Briar, it's most certainly a race, and especially if you're on Lightning Briar. Viscerai, how does that go down, Hayden?
Sorry, I just got confused because you said wizard. Don't you mean ranger?
Oh, Ranger, yeah. I forgot. I think if it's specify, right, you have to say Azalea because like the Ranger kids, like they got the cool kids table, like where they all sit around the Lexi table, and they're still like, they're still the hippies. They're on the Azalea, just being like, it's coming.
Yeah, no, I joke. The matchup Wizard Kano, I guess at this point, but Wizard in general into Viscerai. It's an interesting matchup. I think it depends on like the Viscerai deck you're playing. OTK traditionally Kano just kind of takes a little bit of a what's the word? Goes to the bathroom, goes to the restroom on top of it. You know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah, one of those.
But if you look at some of the more aggressive Viscerai decks where you get to play these like 2 or 3 card hands that like tempo play, maybe keep up a blue to defend, out a Voltic Bolt or a Sonic Boom, whatever. Those games are a bit more interesting and fun to watch, I think. But yeah, it all comes down to the builds of what's happening. But I think Wizard traditionally and probably going forward has a bit of an edge. Just better arcane damage, doesn't really care about split damage that much, to be honest.
Better arcane damage, eh? So heading on to Guardian, we got 2 real options here: Fatigue versus Aggro. Well, it's interesting. I feel like as a roommate player, I don't like to sit across from aggro, but I feel like a lot of Runeblade players don't like to sit across from Fatigue. Fatigue being, in my opinion, extremely beatable as a Runeblade, but aggro, I mean, some of these Guardian cards have been printing, like Terra Sunder. They're brutal.
They're brutal. Yeah, it's like a theory piece as well, right? Where like if you have the experience playing into the Fatigue matchups and you have these really clear game plans, I think one thing that you really like, Brendan, is that you have control of that match. It feels like you are the one playing that game. So the Fatigue player just fatigues you, right? They're going to play the defense reactions. They're going to block out some arcane. They're going to play some staunch responses. It's on you to like play that game, right? Whereas on the flip side, if they're playing, and we call it aggro, it's more of like a mid-range deck, right? That has this really aggressive output with on-hit effects with like pummels and Terra Sunders and crush effects with Spinal Crush and Crippling Crush, etc. That's when I guess the flip side of that is like the Guardian player really has play with that, right? They get to interact in the game. They get to decide how they're going to play it. Some of their draws can be really strong and they get like, the pummel on the right turn, or they get the Terra Sunder just as you're trying to pivot or whatever it might be, or they have the Zealous belting into the Command and Conquer, things like that. So I think that's kind of the differentiation between the play styles of Guardian there. And I agree with you. And personally, I'd rather play into the Fatigue because I think you can come up with a game plan and it plays out basically the same every single time. Whereas you get a bit of a wild card when you've got that other strategy coming at you.
Yeah, a bit of a wild card indeed, like Awakening and then free Spinal Crush. Like, oh wow, nice.
Yeah, but
some of these it's crazy. Yeah. What was that?
I think if you talk about playing the matchup though, if you're talking about the Fatigue side, you have to have a game plan. As Runeblade, you always have to have a game plan of Fatigue. And if it's the other side, you have to have a game plan around how you're going to defend really efficiently. So if we take Briar, for example, you've got to really understand like when you need to push embodiments, when is the correct decision to like attack with an attack action versus attacking with the weapon because your opponent's setting up a pivot turn. When it's correct to just like slap your 5-card hand down and not worry about having an arsenal because you really need the embodiments for next turn, things like that. So that's kind of the play when it comes to playing against Guardian, I think.
For sure. Let's head into the mirrors, the old Runeblade mirror. So I think historically miserable in the Chain days, but Now since those have faded a bit, I mean, chain mirrors are probably still not fun. I think that Briar. I mean, I'll speak to Briar because I haven't played as much as Viscera has used, but Briar mirrors tend to be pretty technical. They're quite fun because it's all about tempo and stacking up the embodiments, add value to your opponent on the blocks, and it ends up being, I think, a skill based matchup.
I love the Briar Mirror. It's one of my favorite matchups, probably in recent. So traditionally, my favorite game to play is Rhina into Bravo. That's been my favorite matchup to play through all of Flesh and Blood. I think it just is really interesting. But Briar v Briar is probably pretty up there for me now. I really enjoy that matchup, and it is, like you say, very skill based. I think, which is really cool. There's a lot of micro decisions and macro decisions to be made during that game. In terms of like Viscerai mirrors traditionally were like they're okay. It often came down to like some of the who had like the better 5-card hands earlier and who could like sort of ride the tempo. But there was some really cool stuff with like how people use their equipment, and then you had like Arcanite Ascendancy cards like that. So yeah, and then how that these kind of interact with each other. I think Chain traditionally has like a good matchup of the Runeblades just because of like Husk, and because like fatiguing with Runeblade is like really difficult to do, and Chain just has like that really strong mid game output, which is where all the kind of Runeblades want to play. I would say, and then like Viscerai, as we've talked about, pretty reasonable matchup into Briar.
Yeah, for sure. All right, heading on to Mechanologist. I think that Runeblade, I guess I would say historically and traditionally, seems to be a bit of a tall order for Mechanologists. Seems quite good.
Yeah, definitely dethrone Dash, right? So Chain was kind of the hero to dethrone Dash from the Crucible into the Monarch meta and take up that mantle of like best deck in the format kind of thing, where Dash had just been so dominant through Arcane Rising and Crucible, albeit, with like a really small, like a much smaller player base and smaller card pool. And then Briar just, I mean, I don't know how many times we ran different iterations of mech into Briar, but it just never felt good. Never felt like you could find a good strategy. There's two kind of key ways that Mechanologist plays, I think, into Runeblade. And it'll depend on what Runeblade they're playing against. They can go like, more of a controlling sort of set up your items, maybe even like semi-fatigue route, which they might do against something like a Chain or a Viscerai, just because of the rune chance. Whereas on the flip side, they might play super aggressive, right? Which is like the full boost version, get your high octanes, get your tomes, get your really aggressive turns out. And they're going to play that, I would say now more so, that's probably the preferred way to play against something like Chain. And definitely the way that they need to play against, I think, these Lightning Briar decks. So there's two different ways for Mechanologists to approach the Runeblade matchups.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting how you say a Chain dethroned mech, because mech definitely made a resurgence after a certain Matt Rogers won with it at one of those Road to Nationals, and we saw a bunch of mech come back into the format. Mech was doing well in the format, well-ish, right?
Yeah, okay,
it was finding success fatiguing Chains who weren't prepared for that kind of match. But then I think it's kind of sort of faded out a little bit, as we saw with the results of the Calling Orlando.
Mm-hmm.
But let's go ahead into my favorite class in the game. I can't believe I said it was Wizard, because obviously it's Illusionist.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about Illusionist right now, it's Viscerai. Viscerai, it's Prism right now. And if we talk about how Prism plays into the Runeblade classes, so you've got the two versions of Illusionist as we speak right now. You've got these more aura-based sort of control-y decks, and you've got these like Herald, like, damage decks. And if you talk about, so we talk about the aura decks. Traditionally, that was, what Tyler Horspool won the calling with, and into certain Chain strategies, like, was really effective, right? It can fatigue them. Briar runs over both of these, especially the aura version, because you just have these, you get to play 5 cards every turn. They just, you can't deal with it as the Prism, just because of the efficiency of cards,
your
right?
blade to break the spectra. Like, I mean, it's for the reasons that Aggro Katsu was good into Aura Prism. Briar is that good plus better, in my opinion.
Yep, exactly. And then with the Herald piece, you get a bit of a, traditionally like Katsu, that was really tough because your on-hit effects were like your only relevant piece, whereas Briar just has like the on-hit effects plus more damage. Plus the embodiments can actually be really key on certain turns as well. Yeah, like you block out the Erudition.
Herald of Judgment. Yeah, Erudition, sorry. It's not so scary anymore when for 5 and you just block with a single non-attack action.
Exactly, and because they need to set up a pivot turn to play something like a Tome of Divinity or whatever, and they need like their 5-card hand to have these massive swing turns, you can recognize that and come prepared with your embodiments of Earth. So traditionally that's how that plays. Viscerai, can be pretty reasonable, I think, into the Herald versions. Your split damage is really annoying for them. The auras can be a bit tougher. They can really control that matchup, stop your rune chance, and get ahead of you on like auras on the board, which can be really difficult for you to deal with.
Yep.
We did skip one,
Awesome.
Brennan. We just got to quickly go back to Ranger.
What was that?
I know
Which
you
one?
purposely
Oh,
skipped Ranger.
I didn't purposely skip Ranger. You left it out of the document because you told me that class basically doesn't exist.
I'm
So
looking at it
everybody
right
who
now.
loves Ranger, let's pick up our pitchforks and let's go after Hayden. All right, let's talk about it though. So Ice Lexi, obviously a big bummer for Lightning Lexi, or for Lightning Briar for sure.
Mhm.
And the Lightning Lexi list is quite good as well. You can have enough embodiments to kind of effectively block them out, but usually they're putting so many things on the chain, and they'll have like an Electrify that's threatening an on hit there. It's generally a harder match in my opinion. We talk about some of the other Rune Blades.
It's difficult for chain as well.
Yeah, oh yeah, for sure. I can only really speak to chain from my own personal experience, into Azalea, and Azalea was actually looked at for a while, and I'm not kidding. Anybody who wasn't there is going to go, yeah, he's lying. No, it's for real. That Azalea was like the peak counter to chain. It was like all theory, right? It's like, how does chain do his thing if you sleep dart him 5 times in a row? It's like, well, yeah, he doesn't, but you have to have freaking sleep dart 5 times in a row. What do you mean? It's like one of my favorite sort of things the meta has gone through was this Azalea to counter chain in the early days. Yeah, because Azalea was just sort of peak theory. Like a lot of Azalea's cards are really bad for chain. Like Red and the Ledger is really bad. Sleep Dart's not great. But you only have 3 Red and Ledgers in your deck, and then chain is just freaking necroing every turn. It's crazy.
Yeah. I definitely was on board the theory as well. The problem is like the hero ability just wasn't the right thing for what you needed out of your cards. So yeah, that's Ranger. I think against chain can really struggle into the ice decks as well. I think one of the most important lightning as well, like just the on-hit effects, the go wide, and the ability to hit these on-hit effects plus play something like a blizzard out of your sideboard, or still like maybe you play Weave Ice and you just give them 1 frostbite, like really good against Lightning Briar, but also against chain can be very difficult as well. So that's kind of the matchups for Runeblade.
Well, now we get to talk about how to beat it, Hayden.
Yeah, we're just going to rattle through because a lot of these really are tying up these core concepts of what we've talked about and basically flipping them and saying like this is the exploitation point to beat Runeblade. So we talk about split damage is efficient. So you have to be proactive to a degree to understand like what's the effective way to stop it. So sometimes it's going to be the physical damage is going to be the most important thing for a given deck. Briar, for example, you really don't care about their rune charm or their arcane damage, because what you really care about when you're playing against Lightning Briar is those on-hit effects. It's the plunder runs, it's the snatches, it's the creating embodiments. Those are the ones that are going to really sort of hurt you. So, and Viscera on the flip side, well, actually it could be the arcane damage. The arcane damage is what's going to they're going to generate with their cards, they're going to come with these rune charts. So really understanding the split damage and how it's efficient and how you can actually counter that is one of the most important ways to beat Runeblade.
Yeah, definitely.
Blocking out the on-hit effects, we talked about hit them with your on-hit effects. Like that's really important, right? So all of these Runeblade decks, they play 2 defense cards, these non-attack actions that defend for 2, whether that's in Briar, which has a metric ton of them, right, with both attack actions and non-attack actions. If they have no embodiments, their hand is really bad for defending with. But also Viscera has these with Morven Skies and like whatever other cards they're gonna play.
Chain has them as well. Like so many. It's just sometimes Briar just has the non-attack actions that block for 8, so that happens, which obviously changes that formula a bit. But yeah, on hit triggers in general against Runeblade are not very good. There's a lot of 2 blocks in the Runeblade class.
Yeah, that's why I talk about a deck like Guardian, like these proactive Guardian lists that play Pommels, they play Zell's Beltings, they play Command and Conquers, they play Terra Sunders. Like that's really difficult for these Runeblades to deal with because, some of them might play some defense reactions like a Viscera, but in general, these turns coming over, they're pushing 3, 4, 5 damage and they're taking a card from your hand, or they're, preventing you from having go again next turn or whatever, and they're taking the tempo from you basically. If you take a deck like Briar, Briar wants to continually just play these 5-card hands. Maybe every now and again it's okay to play a 3-card hand and use 2 cards to defend. But if they lose go again, well, that's like devastating. If they lose 2 cards from hand, that's devastating. The more you disrupt what these Runeblades are trying to do with their 5-card hands, the more the more efficient and the more effective you're going to be against them.
Yeah, I mean, you're preaching to the choir, right? Like, I mean, they can't block out my dominated Red in the Ledger and dominated Sleep Dart every time, right? They just can't do it. So I'm just gonna obviously all jokes here. It's a legit strategy, but we'll see. Right?
That's just the power level's not as high as something like a Guardian or something like an Ice Lexi. That's all.
Yeah, for sure. But I just gotta throw in my little jabs, you know.
Of course you do. We'll get the pitchforks ready for you, my friend.
Yeah, I know. Trust me. When I go to locals, there's a lot of Azalea players that are like, what are you doing around these parts? I'm like, oh, geez.
Yeah, they get their hunting bow and arrow out. I played Azalea for 2 months straight, so I've got my social credit with the the Ranger crowd. At least I hope so. Anyway.
I've just kept it a secret that I like the only deck I actually play in testing and like for fun is Azalea. But I try to like look cool in front of my friends and say I don't play it,
Sasha Markovic. In Blitz, let's talk about how to beat Runeblade in Blitz. You have to, I think, to be honest, so the life total, you have half the life total. It's really important because a deck like Chain, for instance, needs those first two turns to like get going. And yeah, they have Husk, and that's like a bigger percentage of the life totals. But those first 2 turns are really important. And in Blitz, I think you can have decks that just deal more damage. You have Kano, it can just deal more damage, right? Like Rhinar, when it intimidates your whole hand and comes in for 20, is way more effective in Blitz, for instance, for a 1-turn kill sort of thing than it is in Classic Constructed for that kind of effect. So often I think in Blitz, like output of damage and making their game plans inefficient, so making embodiments inefficient because you just don't care about them, or making their split damage inefficient because you just don't care about it, is the way to beat these heroes in Blitz.
Yep, and I do want to make a, because it's always on the sheet, but Chain into Kano and Blitz is Kano's biggest nightmare.
It's funny, yeah.
So rough. Yeah, so Spell Void 2 is just fantastic. So I'm just saying this in case you're getting beat up by Kanos at your local skirmishes, just leave off that Chain because that's a bad one.
Yeah, Arcane Barrier 3 plus the Evenfold.
Yeah, I mean, plus you got Spell Void, and then it's just so fast. Like, Kano just doesn't do well into decks that will just kind of, like full face with like tons of damage.
It's interesting. Really, I think like Kano, so I don't like playing into that matchup. I think it's one of the matchups as a Kano player, I don't really want to play against. But I don't think it's actually it's not horrendous, to be honest. It's just that you have to play in a different way because of the Spell Void and the Arcane Barrier 3, and it's frustrating.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. But then I'd also borderline say it's like it gets close to horrendous. It's pretty bad. But I did play Dan McKay in a skirmish, and he was on Chain. I was on Kano. I slapped him on stream.
Exactly. There you go. That's the way to do it. All right.
Awesome. Yeah, let's go ahead and close it out. Do you want to just shout out the Arsenal Pass YouTube page? Like I said, we got a bunch of more content coming up there in the future, as well as this Lightning Briar deck. This deck we've talked about a ton on this podcast. We got the deck going up, and then obviously all the extra content for that on Patreon as well as like some gameplay and just tons of fun stuff. We're also experimenting with a lot of stuff on YouTube. Maybe we're staying with our sort of our weekly content, right? Like we got our gameplay, we got our pod, we got our time in the round, but then we're maybe adding and sprinkling in a little bit of solo content as well to try to keep up with some, very interesting or like hot topics when they arise, like this crazy hybrid Briar deck that's super exciting. So check us out, Arsenal Pass YouTube. And then Hayden and I are both on Twitter. I'm located at Brendan APG. Hayden is located at Fiendel, FYEN_Dale. Just hit us up on there. We love engaging with everybody on Twitter. It's just a great time. And finally, shout out to the Patreon. Thank you all so much for supporting. Again, we do have a bunch of extra content there, including extra podcasts, live sessions, and all kinds of deck deep dives, sideboard guides, all you need to pick up the deck and start being competitive. But until next time, Hayden, what's the rest of the line? You said this is my Brendanism.
Until next time, we'll see you in the next video.
Oh, yeah. See you guys.